Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares with the Economic and Financial Report. Coming up, special interview with Nobel laureate Alvin Roth on his game-changing theory. First, the headlines. Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen warned that U.S. stock market valuations were quite high and posed potential dangers to financial stability. Yellen also said low long-term interest rates could spike as the Fed normalizes its policy, causing disruption across the financial system. She tempered her remarks, saying she did not anticipate any bubbles and described risks to financial stability as moderated. U.S. stocks traded lower following the comments, building on earlier declines triggered by weak private job data.
Overall, though, I think my assessment at this point would be that risks to financial stability are moderated, not elevated at this point. And I say that because we're not seeing any broad-based pickup in leverage. We're not seeing rapid credit growth. We're not seeing an increase in maturity transformation.
Sudan aims to expand its gold industry to keep the economy afloat after losing 3/4 of its oil production in 2011 when South Sudan seceded. Sudan expects to produce 76 tons of gold in 2015, topping last year's record-high production in the African nation. Oil was the main source of foreign currency used to support the Sudanese pound and to pay for food and other imports. Sudan sits on what could be Africa's largest gold reserves, but a U.S. trade embargo in place since 1997 deters most Western firms. And as the central bank sometimes buys gold above the global rate to curb gold smuggling to Dubai, it is also a source of inflation.
The gold has now become a curse for the economy because its exploration resulted to hikes in inflation and the increase of liquid money, especially because the government purchases the gold from the traditional miners to cover the deficit. This has its impact in increasing the supply of money and inflation, resulting in price hikes.
Thousands of Colombian teachers took to the streets demanding better salaries, health care, and investment in education. According to union data, public school teachers receive an average monthly salary of $509. The movement has gained support from more than 300,000 teachers across the country, leaving 9 million children without classes since late April. Teachers and the government on Wednesday reached an agreement in principle, suggesting a 12% rise in salary. But the teachers' union nevertheless continued a massive rally in Bogota.
We are supporting this because it not only affects salaries or teachers' quality of life. The education system is at stake here.
German engineering giant Siemens on Thursday announced an additional 4,500 job cuts worldwide. The new cuts come just months after Siemens said it would reduce its global headcount by 7,400. 1,200 jobs will be cut in the power and gas divisions, which were plagued by falling prices, stiffer competition, and overcapacity. The total of roughly 13,100 job losses is part of a company-wide restructuring, which includes selling off non-core businesses and focusing more on energy. It's always inspiring to speak with a Nobel laureate. This week we had the opportunity to host a special guest who has had a game-changing impact on school selection in America's biggest cities. Here's the interview. We're joined today by a person who is known mainly for a solution to the difficult problem of matching students with schools in big cities like New York and Boston. He's also pioneered an innovative kidney swap program where people who want to donate a kidney to a loved one with an incompatible blood type can form a network with other incompatible donor pairs. For those of you who haven't figured it out yet, we're talking about Nobel laureate in economics Alvin E. Roth, professor of economics at Stanford University and the Gunn Professor of Economics and Business Administration Emeritus at Harvard University. Professor Roth, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We also are joined, of course, by Daniel Roth, I-24 News economic journalist who is with us on a regular basis. Professor Roth, just to start with you. Much of your research has focused on the intersection between economics and game theory specifically education. You yourself, from what I understand, dropped out of high school at one point and found your way back to the academia. Why did you drop out of high school, and what was your route back?
Well, I was an ungrateful high school student, so I didn't appreciate all the things my teachers were trying to do for me.
I see, okay.
But I didn't stay out of education, so I didn't drop out of education. I got a college degree and I got a PhD, so I'm a big fan of education.
Clearly, based on everything you've done for education, but was there a specific reason that has an impact on your decision to be involved with game theory today?
Well, so I was an unhappy high school student, but a happy college student. So I think that I became interested in how people interact with institutions, and game theory is a set of tools that helps us think about that. And the area of economics that I now work in is called market design, and that involves trying to build institutions so that they serve people better.
Okay. Now, I mean, obviously, economics for a lot of people, perhaps not our viewership, can be a rather boring or sort of dry subject, very mathematical, right? I mean, the concept of you taking this game theory and applying it to the real life situation, to education, something that's extremely important for the future of society, is phenomenal. But I would like to know, I mean, what challenges do you see on the horizon in terms of practical implementation of this game theory?
Well, more and more markets are becoming computer assisted. We do a lot of things on the internet. Mm-hmm. We buy things from internet sellers. We maybe get dates and find our spouses through the internet. We can apply for jobs through the internet. And so computers change a little bit the way markets are working, and I think that's something that we'll have to understand better as we get used to these markets.
Right. Well, certainly talking about the markets, but let's go back to something that is perhaps a little bit closer to your heart, or to our hearts, at least in terms of development, because education, of course, stands at the very bottom of that, at the very base of that. I mean, what are some of the big challenges that you came across in working with the education system in the States? Well,
you know, we like to think of education as an instrument of social mobility, but it doesn't always work as well as we would like it, and in particular, children who grow up in poor neighborhoods often go to schools that aren't very good if you assign children to schools by neighborhood. So we've started in the U.S., in many U.S. cities, to embrace school choice, and we're trying to make that work well. It turns out that my colleagues and I have helped redesign school choice systems in cities in New York that have school choice, but it turns out how you do school choice can influence how effective it is. So we're trying to understand that and help cities build better school choice systems. Just to put some numbers to some of the work that you've done, I mean, essentially dealing with a metropolitan area like New York City, for what I read in one of the articles that I went over, you're dealing with maybe 70,000 eighth graders or 80,000 eighth graders trying to make it into 700 different types of schools in their area. I mean, this is one of the reasons why it's an issue, and specifically when it concerns kids who come from poorer families, you know, more impoverished neighborhoods. I mean, this can be a real game changer, right? Right. So we think that having a unified enrollment system where there's one system to apply to all the schools helps make the schools more accessible to children who might not always think about going to schools outside of their neighborhood, or schools that are more competitive and challenging, and that's partly what we'd like to see. Also, when you have a good system of school choice, you can start to gather better data on how schools are performing. It's hard to measure how schools are performing when schools get different groups of students, because different groups of students will do more or less well regardless of the schools. But when you start to have a good school choice system, you can start to look at comparable children and how they perform in the schools and identify which schools are doing well and which schools could use improvement. Right.
Have you seen success coming out of these system changes? Has there been marked success, perhaps in raising up the opportunities of lower income students, for example? Has there been any sort of numbers coming out?
So we're just starting to see numbers. It takes a while before you can ask questions like, how does school choice succeed in raising the high school graduation rate, for example? So that takes a while, and we're just at the beginning of being able to see numbers like that. My colleagues, Parag Patak and Attila Abdulkadiroglu, are leading the way on that. But what we've certainly seen is that we change the mobility within a city of who goes to which schools. Those are also, incidentally, highly political issues. So what we try to do is build the tools of a good school choice system that, nevertheless, the political process every year decides which students to give priority to for which schools. But what we wouldn't like is that the school choice system is wasteful, that in the sense that your child would go to a school that would be really good for my kid, and while my kid goes to a school that's really good for your kid. Mm-hmm. That's a shame. You know, it's hard to make more good schools. It's a shame if you don't use the ones you have effectively.
Would you say that the school system in the U.S. at least does enough to engage students in terms of economics and math? I mean, what kind of, what specific point of the educational system in the U.S. worries you or excites you?
Well, so we have a highly diverse school system in the U.S. because we organize it by municipalities. So we don't have a national curriculum. So different schools do that differently well. And of course, it's hard to bring useful math to children at early enough levels. And we certainly don't teach much economics in the high schools, but we're starting to do more. And a lot of making the school system work well is to make sure that children from underprivileged families have real access, not just nominal access to good schools.
Okay. How has the rewarding of the Nobel Prize affected you personally?
Well, for the first 2 years, it kept me very busy, but now I'm beginning to get my travel under control, and it does give me an opportunity to speak to wider audiences about how economics and the institutions we build to regulate economic interactions can affect everyone's lives. Because I think a lot about matching markets, which are markets where you care who you're dealing with. And these are some of our most important markets: how you get jobs, what school you go to, who you marry. So these things affect people quite a bit. One thing I've done, I've got a book coming out called Who Gets What and Why. It'll come out in June, and I'm looking forward to speaking to audiences about these kinds of things.
Well, I hope you can come to us as well and speak about that. Thank you very much, Professor Alvin Roth, Nobel laureate in economics. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And as Britons go to the polls today, we take a look now at what the newspapers are saying in Media Watch. Daniel.
How's it going?
Good, good, good. So what are the newspapers saying about this election?
They're being very, very specific in what they're saying. Everywhere you look, at every front page today and for the last few days, they've been very clear. It's no mystery about who's supporting who. The Daily Express, for example, very clear in their support of UKIP, of voting for Nigel Farage.
Right.
Everyone else basically supporting keeping the Conservatives in power.
I mean, the Telegraph actually came out with a letter, if I'm not mistaken, right? Of support.
And
I mean, that's unheard of.
Sending an email out, actually.
Yeah.
It's really, it's almost an affront. It's, they kind of, in these last few days, put journalism aside and just kind of and just
unabashedly throw their support in one direction or the other.
There was one paper that put support in Labour's corner, and that was the Daily Mirror. And I'm not so familiar with the Mirror. Today I spent some time on their website, and I don't know if I could say that I'd want necessarily this paper to be behind me. That's it's somewhere on the cusp of rag and newspaper. It's it's a pretty funny place to get support from. But that was the one piece of Labour support. Surprising, and this actually speaks to the power of the Labour Party right now in the polls. Moving on to there's a piece in Quartz magazine, basically saying that the two leading parties are split 34% and 34%. That's what they're going to get. That's what the latest polls say. Now, I say this speaks to the strength of the Labour Party, because when you have basically every newspaper, every media source out there being specific about who they want you to vote for, and the Labour Party's getting the 1 from the Daily Mirror,
Right.
they're still polling next to the Conservatives, which is pretty darn amazing.
It seems to me also that, I mean, it shows that at a certain point, the media has no more input, so to speak. I mean, they can't really change your mind when you look around and you realize what you don't like about the situation that you're living in.
Right, and it's very interesting, actually. This Quartz piece goes on to say that 90% of the seats used to be made up by these two main parties. Nowadays, that's dissipated. The small parties have an enormous amount of power. And of course, we don't know the results right now as we're taping.
Right.
We will know the results soon. But we're really looking at an open race where these two major parties are not so much the major parties.
Okay, well, we'll see. Daniel Roth, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And that concludes our Economy Magazine, your daily source for economic and financial reports at I-24 News. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Thanks for watching and keep on watching. Thank you.